Congressman Ruiz, we are at the Salton Sea. You've done a lot of work with the Salton Sea over the past several years. Let's start with this most recent meeting on the federal level. There was a federal hearing the first federal hearing in decades back in September. Talk to me about that. How did that come about? What was discussed?
Well, I was introducing a bill, the Salton Sea Health and Environment Protection Act, and in order to get it passed in the House, you need to have a hearing. And so the Natural Resources Committee, who I've been speaking with for many years now about this issue, decided to hold this hearing and really talk about specifically the Salton Sea, which is a significant event, because if you think of all the national issues that our government has to address, carving space for a very specific environmental issue like this was pretty significant. So we were able to talk about the health implications, the economic implications, not only for the surrounding communities, but for the entire region, for the state, and even for the southwest United States.
Okay, we were talking about the federal hearing. So you got that on there. That is the first step. How did you feel about how the hearing went? Because that was all.
Well, you know, the purpose of the hearing is to talk about the issues at hand. And I did that and other members did that. Unfortunately, it became a hyper-partisan battle where there were some Republicans who just wanted to make this a criticism of Governor Newsom, and then it was a back and forth on that issue or some partisan insults. But the important thing is to cut through that partisanship and just focus on what's important. And what's important is that we have a body of water in the midst of a community and a region that suffers from pulmonary illnesses. This body of water will recede. The dust with the chemicals will be exposed to the lungs and the blood of the residents residing around the sea. The dust can be blown to as far as Arizona, potentially even LA, San Diego. There's very fine dust particles, and the surrounding community already has the highest pediatric asthma hospitalization rate in the whole state of California. So this is terrible for the public's health. This is also terrible for our economy because with the stink, nobody's going to want to live around an area that smells like rotten fish or rotten egg. Property value will go down. Our tourism industry will collapse. That stink goes all the way to LA, which could potentially go down to San Diego with the right wind conditions. And so it's also an ecological catastrophe in our hands, because you have millions of birds that use this stop as a migratory stop on their way south to feed on the tilapia and others. Of course, as a doctor and a public health expert, my priority are the children and the lungs of the seniors and those with already underlying pulmonary illnesses that are going to be exacerbated if we don't handle this situation right away.
Right. On that, talk about that. You were saying a little bit how that stink reached, West Coachella Valley for a few days, a couple years ago. And that was when people had to rethink about the Salton Sea again, because it had actually affected them. Could it get worse as time goes on if nothing is done? I mean, people outside of this immediate area will start feeling those effects.
Yeah, it can get worse. And it's unfortunate that the Salton Sea hasn't been high on the radar for decades for people throughout California. And one of our challenges, but opportunity at the same time, is to really sound the alarm with the megaphone to draw attention to this Salton Sea, because it will affect people. It will affect people who live in LA, who live even in San Francisco. Not only in the catastrophe of what this would mean to the state of California, but also on the flip side, the opportunity that we have here for the entire state as an economic engine. I mean, we can produce geothermal energy to help meet our renewable energy resource for the whole state of California and our goal, and help alleviate and mitigate the climate change. We can also, as a byproduct, produce lithium that without having to mine, without having to break dirt, demolish any national monument as the previous administration wanted to do in opening up our lands near Joshua Tree. But we can do so simply by taking the byproduct of the geothermal energy production process. And there's studies showing that there's enough lithium there where we can be the second most exporting lithium country in the world. Right now, we have to import most of our lithium into our country. And in the age of a future economy based on batteries and renewable energy and electricity, lithium is going to be very, very valuable. The different electrical cars require lithium to run their batteries. So this needs not only the urgency and the attention in the state of California, but it is a federal issue as well, because half of the land here is owned by the Bureau of Land Management, by the federal government. Then you have a checkerboard pattern of ownership with the state, with the tribes, and a few private landowners on the edge of the Salton Sea. So that is why this is an all hands on deck process. There is no one government entity that's going to fix it all. There is no one government entity that has the full blame or that is at fault for what happened here. So this is where we all have to work together in cooperation, in coordination, to make sure that we work in tandem to fix this and prevent the dust from being exposed.
So many things I wanted to jump on. Okay, so let's talk about the timeline first. So I know it takes a while, as everything does. We had the federal hearing in September. What now? What is the ideal timeline for when things could maybe start happening and funds can be shifted?
Well, let's take a step back and realize where we've been and where we're at now, because it's very important to understand that it's not just starting, that this has been going on for a while. When I got elected in 2012, the very first thing I did, and this was even prior to being sworn in, was to come to the Red Hill Bay in the Salton Sea with Secretary of the Interior, then Ken Salazar, and Senator Barbara Boxer to discuss the Salton Sea. That was a very, very important first step, because from that, we were able to get the processing and the funding necessary to get the Red Hill Bay launched. Before that, it was all studies after studies after studies after studies, and I'm sick and tired of studies that go nowhere. So we need to make sure that we had a groundbreaking, shovel in hand, hard hat on your head event to build momentum, because at that time, our worst enemy was inertia. Nothing was getting done. And we accomplished that in that time frame early on by breaking ground and having an actual project which was groundbreaking for the Salton Sea efforts. That helped build the momentum. At that point, we didn't have any projects, we didn't have any funding, and we didn't have any plans, okay? So now we have a plan that we coalesced around the Salton Sea Management Plan with the state of California. I was able to broker a memorandum of understanding with the federal government and their agencies to follow through and be a part of this plan in order to build that collaboration, all hands on deck approach. And with that came $30 million. I was able to then bring more attention with the Army Corps of Engineers for the process of the permitting of those projects. And so we have built that momentum. Now, with the state's bonds and other efforts, there's funding that's allocated for the Salton Sea. We need more, and we also need to hurry up these projects, because even though we have projects, the Red Hill Bay, which is soon to be completed, we have the habitat conservation plan from the state that's soon going to break ground, and we also have the North Lake Perimeter Plan that is on deck to be approved in order to break ground there too. So we have this momentum, and we're making that progress, albeit I'm a very impatient man when it comes to the health of my patients and my constituents. I want to fix the problem right away. So we need to be faster, and we need more resources. We need better coordination. We need to streamline the plans. That's where my Salton Sea Health and Environmental Protection Act comes in, because it does several things. One, it matches the monies that the state would put in the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. Two, it would better improve the coordination in order to streamline these projects that we need to break ground right away. Three, it protects the environment because it helps to place air monitors around here so we can respond quicker in case there is a bad air quality from the dust particles and the chemicals that are on the shore. So it is a pretty comprehensive bill that was worked on with local community groups, with the different counties and the Salton Sea Authority and the state of California as well, in partnership to get this enormous resource and solution on the table. Now, we had the hearing last Congress, but now that we have a new Congress, we need another hearing, and we need another markup in that hearing, and we need to keep working it in order to get it passed from committee and then also from the House. And we need a senator to introduce my bill, and I've spoken with Senator Feinstein and Senator Padilla about this already. Okay. And then they need to pass that bill so that we can get it and send it to the president's desk. Now that's one way, and the best way, in my opinion, to really focus on the Salton Sea and then help build that all hands on deck approach that we really need. Yeah. The chair of the Natural Resources Committee, Representative Raul Ruiz, is very concerned about the environmental injustice of this area, with the surrounding communities oftentimes being poor and marginalized, that have disparities in health outcomes. And then last year, I brought the chairwoman of the Appropriations and Funding Committee that deals with bodies of waters like the Salton Sea, Marcy Captor, and we toured the area so she saw firsthand what it was about. Mm-hmm. We continue to have conversations, and she's very interested in finding the routes of funding that's necessary. We also have the potential Secretary of Energy who is interested in the lithium production and the geothermal energy of the Salton Sea. So there's a lot of different venues that I'm working to find that open path so that we can bring in the resources and we can expedite the projects that are necessary to keep the dust from blowing in the air.
Yeah. So the hearing that happened September, it happened, there's interest, it's on the radar, but you have to have another hearing now to get it into committee, which is just how Congress...
It's just how it works.
Those are the rules.
Every new Congress, you have to reintroduce any bill that you've done in the past, and you have to start the process again. Right. And so that's why I always say, don't wait for an act of Congress or for Congress to get its act together. We have to mobilize whatever we can in venues locally, regionally, to get it done.
So that makes the timeline really tough to even project or idealize?
The decision makers are the chairs of the committees and the speaker or in the House and the majority leader in the Senate. What I'm doing is I'm building goodwill and the political interest of those decision makers to really bring this up to their attention. And we've made progress. And the reason why we've introduced the bill last Congress was because when we started this whole Salton Sea momentum back in that very historic meeting at the Red Hill Bay many years ago, there were a lot of different venues that we were looking at. There were a lot of different players and responsible entities that we had to work with to get to this place. And one of the challenges that I had very early on was that there was a lot of competition between the agencies and a lot of political egos where people wanted to use the Salton Sea as their cause to campaign. And so you heard a lot of noise during campaigns, but you saw no real action on the ground. And there was a lot of competition with the agencies to determine who was going to be the recipient of the funding and which projects and which ideas were going to be moving forward. I came in and said that we needed to coordinate, to put aside the egos, because the people that we serve are the people that are going to be destroyed by the stink, the dust, and that we needed to really handle this in a very urgent manner. And working together now, we're making that progress. Working together, we're seeing the momentum build, and we're focused on the Salton Sea Management Plan. Now we need to shepherd all the projects through and to keep track of the dust and follow the receding shoreline and cover the dust as it moves beyond.
Well, the state's Salton Sea Management Plan is good. It's there. They are severely behind schedule, though. There are thousands and thousands of acres behind. They haven't even fully funded it. What does that look like going forward if they're so behind? They're not going to hit it doesn't look like they're going to hit that 10-year mark of which they have said they would. It's not the most encouraging. Why do you think they've waited? Why start now? It's like they just got started, even though this was back in 2017, right? Like,
yeah. So there was a lot of emphasis on the QSA agreement that the state brokered, and the state took on a large portion of the responsibility. But the state can't do it alone. They just simply can't. We need our tribes, we need the local counties, we need the water districts, we need the federal government, we need philanthropists, and we need private business to all coordinate together to handle this behemoth of a potential public health crisis. And so with the QSA and the water agreement that now the Salton Sea is receiving less of the water, the timeline of the receding shoreline has sped up, right? So the state is coming in. And to Governor Newsom's credit, I have seen Governor Newsom every time I speak with him. He mentions the Salton Sea, and his administration has really made this a priority for him. The rate limiting factors at this point are the actual processing of the projects. So they're projects on paper and on design, but they have to go through a lot of reviews in order to ensure that they're going to be stable, sustainable, as well that they're not going to make an environmental problem even worse. And so those are the endpoints, the fixes that need to be made with one of the processes that I'm doing in my bill is to help the coordination to make sure it's a priority, put those applications on the top of the pile in people's desk, in other words, so that they can get to them and they can speed up that process to approve. Because you can have all the projects on paper and all the money in the world, but if they're not ready to be funded, then they're just sitting there. And so not only do we need that, but we also have to think 5-10 years ahead of time, so we have the money and the reserves in order to allocate to those projects.
so that's my next question. One of the activists' concerns, a lot of these activist group, is that you have a bunch of small projects going on, a wetland project here, habitat project there, but this does nothing for us 20 years down the line because no water is being put back in because it's been siphoned away per the QSA. So their plan, their desire is to build that canal. They think the canal from the Sea of Cortez to the Salton Sea is the most viable option. I would love to hear your thoughts on this long-term.
You know, in theory, when you talk about, hey, how are we going to get more water into the Salton Sea, then one can suppose that building a canal from the Sea of Cortez, from Mexico, transversing all the southern border of California into the Salton Sea, would be a viable concept of bringing in water. In fact, you know, you could do it that's big enough where you can bring ships, and this could be a port of entry with cargo, etc. It sounds really good, but is it feasible? Is it feasible with the time frame that we have and what we need to get done now, today, or yesterday, right? Because that would entail going into binational negotiations at the highest level of the executive branch that that will then coincide with other trade agreements, and then you bring in the whole economic interest of both countries, and then you would have to get the funding to invest in bringing that water, building that canal, breaking dirt. Is it doable? Do I think that we can do it? Then I think it's possible, but when will that happen? And so if you're asking, or if individuals are asking, that we stop all other efforts and focus on getting that plan through with the resources and capacity that we have now, then if it's a 20, 30 year project, then this water will recede, the dust will be exposed, and then we're going to have that public health catastrophe. So we don't have the time, the resources for that grand project. And one of the issues that I confronted, Angela, when I first got here, was the notion of a Cadillac plan, right? There was a plan that passed that people were coalescing around that cost like $9 billion to the state of California. And then the recession hit. And that bubble burst. So instead of the one fix all approach, I've worked to try to change the mindset of those that have been working for so long to do it in a multi-phase, multi-project approach in order to get wins. And that was important because inertia was our enemy. We didn't do anything because everybody was looking for the grand plan. So if we were break it down into more doable projects and break ground and show the private industry that we mean business, that we're getting things done, to work out the kinks between the stakeholders that at that time were competing and now collaborating, if we can bring the governments around a plan, then we can build confidence not only from the community but other entities of government to say, okay, now I will invest in this area because there's a foundation of work and progress that's being made. And so the issue that we're facing now are those implementation issues of getting the Red Hill Bay completed, of getting the designs up to par, of getting them approved for the other projects, the designs, and getting the other projects approved, and then starting to break ground. So the more we do that, the better it is, because we don't have time for an endeavor of binational massive negotiations on water rights and water usage right now. Now, would I like to see something like that? Of course. But as an emergency medicine physician, I have dealt with complex life or death situation my entire career. And when a multi-vehicle car accident patient comes in with an open femur fracture and they have other injuries, what is the first thing I have to do? In order to save that patient's life, I have to stop the bleeding, right? And then after I stop the bleeding, I can reduce the fracture, put it in place, and then they can go to the operating room, and then from the operating room they go to rehab, and then they can deal with the patient's diabetes, they can deal with the patient's COPD and lung problems, and then eventually they'll get to rehabilitation. If the patient comes in and I'm thinking about how to rehabilitate that patient while the patient's bleeding in front of me and he could potentially die, then I would be negligent. So right now, the Salton Sea, using that characteristic, is that analogy, the Salton Sea is bleeding, and I need to protect my constituents, I need to protect the residents, I need to protect the farm worker children that already are suffering with asthma, and I need to make sure that this dust doesn't get exposed any further and that we cover it.
So it is possible down the line, but the more immediate problem is the dust, which will be hopefully solved with all these projects around the shoreline to help that dust prevent. And then down the line, you can maybe talk about a canal or the overarching. It's not something that can happen at the same time.
If we can stabilize this dust from being exposed, and we put the Salton Sea in that rehab phase where we're going to be okay, and now we have the opportunity to have the time to start pressuring an administration to specifically concentrate on this Salton Sea and get their cabinet members to do bilateral negotiations with Mexico to then discuss water rights and all the other things that go along with it, and if we can secure the investments needed, private, public investments, to build a canal that can bring ships from the Sea of Cortez down to here, I'm all in because we need to relieve the congestion in Long Beach, and it will cut down on the pollution, because if this could be a port, it's already halfway through California, almost, I mean more than halfway, because we're almost at the Arizona border, and it would be a great economic boon for this location. We're not there yet, and we have dust being exposed, and so we need to stop the bleeding to save the patient, and then once we can get to that stable place, then we can think of the more grand plans that that folks are thinking about.
I want to go back to the environmental and health concerns that some people may not believe is as dire a threat as some other people have made it out to be. Talk to me about the health concerns here. You brought up arsenic. It can get into your bloodstream. Tell me what you understand about just how bad this dust is.
Look, the Salton Sea is a recipient of runoff from agriculture. They use pesticides, okay? There's a lot of pesticides that are being used. In addition to that, there's a lot of naturally occurring chromium, selenium, arsenic in the soil, in the ground, in the water, in this region. In addition to that, you have the algae, you have the salt, and you have the decaying of the fish and other wildlife in the Salton Sea. All those are deposits into the sand. And now what makes this type of sand dangerous is that there are such small particles that as you breathe them, they can cross the lung-blood barrier. So there's no filter. So imagine these small particles carrying these toxic chemicals that get straight into your blood. Now, arsenic in a toxic form or in a chronic form can blunt developmental growth, can blunt cognitive development, which means that our children will be poor performing in school. The employees won't be able to function at their best at work. They won't be able to learn, and therefore their opportunities will be diminished, okay? There's an acute phase. You have headaches, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. You have respiratory illnesses, and you have these metals that can be deposited into the tissues of your lungs. Nobody wants any type of metal deposited in your lungs. It's not good. So this is a public health crisis, and we need to ensure that we prevent these dust particles from going into the air. Because if you look at the basic element of that threat, it's the dust particles in the air that gets into your blood through your lungs. So we need to prevent the dust from being exposed. That's my focus right now, is how to do that.
There's zero doubt in your mind that the exposed playa is connected to the high pulmonary and breathing issues that these kids have around the Salton Sea.
So the children that live in poverty, and in this area we have a lot of poverty and we have a lot of farm worker communities, it's a big ag community, experience high rates of asthma due to their poverty and their living conditions, okay? On top of that, you put dust particles in the air with these toxic chemicals, then you have exacerbations of their asthma that are not well controlled to begin with. And then when you have a population that suffers from asthma in communities with no doctors, with no clinics, with very little health insurance, that are impoverished, with very little resources, then you're basically exacerbating a problem that shouldn't have existed to begin with, but now they're going to be even worse off. And that is not just that child's problem, which should be the major concern for all of us. That is an issue for the rest of society, because there's resources, there's times, there's hospital utilizations, there's a lot of social implications to helping the poor child who's having to be hospitalized. Then they send them back to the community post-discharge under the exact same conditions. That is why this is an environmental justice issue. An environmental justice issue is not just an issue of bad decisions without the consent of the communities that would face the consequences of those projects or businesses that are polluting their air, water, or soil. It is also an issue of neglect, where people turn a blind eye or don't make this a priority because the surrounding community are marginalized, poor, or don't have resources. Well, I intend to change that.
For the people watching in Palm Springs, still Coachella Valley, but they have never come out here. This is so removed from them. It's far. It's a place on the map. Why should they care? And the people beyond in San Bernardino and LA counties.
Well, look, as a man of faith, that, you know, follows the teachings of the great Jesus, they should care, and I care, because children, one, are suffering and could even suffer more. But let's say that we're communicating with people who only care about themselves, or care about what the consequences is for their own personal lives, and for the things they own. They should care, because if the dust goes into the air at the degree that scientists have said could happen, if there is stink and a foul smell with that dust, then their property value will dramatically decrease. Their retirement environment that they so desperately have saved up for to live here in paradise during the winters will be no more, because then this tourism industry would collapse, and nobody would want to live here, and so nobody would want to come and perform, and there would be no dining out. So that is why it is so important, one, for the sheer public health of it, for individuals who would be most at risk of suffering. Two, because it would decrease their property value, it would ruin our economy, jobs would go down because our tourism industry would take a big hit. And then finally, you know, just because you live in Rancho Mirage doesn't mean you're immune to the pulmonary or other places that you mentioned. Doesn't mean you're immune to having pulmonary illnesses. People are elderly with chronic bronchitis, emphysema, other pulmonary illnesses, and they too will have increase in exacerbation, increasing personal medical costs, and spend more time in emergency rooms in their life, which I'm sure they don't want to have. So this is an all of us problem. It is not a their problem, it is an all of us problem. All of us, all the way from the Imperial County through Riverside County to Sacramento County. This is an all of us problem all the way from Bombay Beach, where we're standing right now, to the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C. This is an all of us problem, meaning every household that lives anywhere in a 100, 200 mile radius of the Salton Sea, from San Diego, LA, Santa Barbara, all the way north into the San Bernardino County, and even east into Arizona, because we would all be at risk of breathing in the dust particles and smelling the stink with the right air conditions and air quality and winds, everybody would be at risk. And that's why we need to make sure that that doesn't happen.
How hopeful are you with President Biden now, the new administration, in funding this bill if it gets through all those hurdles, that they will approve and support this going forward?
You know, I'm hopeful because the administration under President Biden's leadership actually cares about the environment. They actually care about equity. They actually care about environmental justice. They actually care about farm worker children who grow up in marginalized, impoverished communities. I'm also hopeful because with a Democratic majority in the House, I have good willed decision makers. The chair of the appropriations that funds the bills, Rosa DeLaro, the chair of the subcommittee that funds the issues that deal with water, like Marcy Kaptur, the chair of natural resources, like Raul Grijalva, and that I have built good relationships with throughout the years. And now that we have this plan derived from the local community and the stakeholders, they're willing to help us move forward and look at other options within the Department of the Interior and utilizing the energy production potential in order for a way to come in. But in every opportunity I speak, even if it's a business or energy development opportunity, I always say that whatever decisions happen, one, need to include the local residents, always, and two, they should always benefit the local residents. And then finally, three, there has to be a component that goes back into a general fund for the Salton Sea in order to benefit the surrounding communities.
And there is no general fund as of now.
There is no general fund. There's monies being pulled in, but if we bring in geothermal production, if we bring in the State Department of Energy into this area, there has to be environmental justice, community input and development potential that comes in there. I do not want a scenario where people come in, extract the energy, extract the lithium, and not a damn thing happens to the Salton Sea and the communities remain impoverished as they always have. That is not acceptable for me.
Final question on your on the act that you are trying to get through. When ideally, I know you can't say the exact same thing,
I
but
want
the
it
next
to get
hearing
through
now. I know
this
yesterday.
year, you know.
But realistically, when do you think you can get the hearing? I know you're probably already putting it in motion, but
you know,
with
I realistically, I want to get it through before the end of this year, so that we can.
The hearing or like the entire.
The markup, the bill on the floor, I'm pushing it before the end of this year. Now, mind you, it may pass the House. We still have the Senate,
Sure.
right? And you know how they've been working lately, and so, you know, with a 60 vote requirement for just a specific issue like this would be very difficult to do. However, if we pass the provision in the House, then Senator Schumer can have this piece of legislation that can be inserted into larger bills as a train or a vehicle to move my legislation forward. I don't care how it gets through. I just want it to be on the president's desk so that we can have the outcome for the people I care about and we can protect our communities. That's the most important thing for me. So the same could be true in the House. It could be moved and into the House floor with either a budget bill or some other type of larger environmental protection bill or something that we can foresee moving forward. And this could be part of a climate change proposal as well, with the environmental justice notion that's involved in here.
So you're hopeful in Senate by the end of the year? Hopeful, I know, being.
No, I'm hopeful that we can get it out of the House by the end of the year, but you know, it's very difficult to pin down.
Yeah, no, and we'll explain how difficult each process is.
To tell you exactly what's going to happen, because there could be a crisis, like a pandemic, that completely wipes all your plans out, and then you have to wait 2 years afterwards to really start focusing on other issues. Yeah. But I can tell you that this bill will be dropped very soon. We will have the community celebrate its reintroduction, and we are already working with the different committees in terms of the hearings that are necessary. I have made the Salton Sea an issue with the Appropriations Committee. They know about it, and so there's a lot of active conversations going on within different entities within the federal government.
Final question for you. You grew up in Coachella. You have your own experiences out here. I'd love to hear how living near the Salton Sea has shaped your passion for saving this, and also any anecdotes you may have that kind of shows how close to your heart this is.
Well, as you know, Angela, I'm a son of farm workers, and I grew up in a trailer park in Coachella the first few years of my life. So I understand what it is to suffer in poverty, to not have sometimes enough, and I also understand how hard farm workers and produce packers and the community around here work in order to feed everybody else, and all the sacrifices that they make with calloused hands, tired backs, working in unrelenting 120-degree heat during the summers, and being exposed to the elements like that. So I have that compassion for communities who work hard and still can't get by, and then on top of that, they have to deal with environmental risks like the Salton Sea. So I feel very well connected to the people in the surrounding area. And so my heart bleeds for anybody who works so hard in such dire situations in order to give their kids opportunities like my parents did for me. And so that's one of the reasons why I care so much about environmental justice issues in the surrounding communities. And then the other thing is, you know, this is a very beautiful, large body of water in the middle of the desert. I mean, how unique is that in our country, and how amazing it is to drive by or fly over and just see how large the Salton Sea really is. My dad used to bring us here, and sometimes we'd have picnics by certain beach fronts. You know, he tried to bring me out to fish a couple times, but sometimes the stink was so bad I didn't want to come back. But you know, there was some fishing, and sometimes my dad and you know, his sons were, including myself, were into riding motorcycles and our little odysseys, and we would go down to Glamis or other places, and we'd pass this place, find a spot to ride our vehicles, and we'd take a break, and we'd pull up by the beach, and we would share a meal together and just stop and rest. And then during the winter, you'd have this cool breeze that we're feeling now, which was amazing for us desert dwellers. And so sometimes we'd probably take a nap, you know, and those with the windows down, with those good on those good days. So you know, those were intimate moments that I shared with my father and with my family when we'd come all together to have some picnics by here, and so you know, I think that there is a strong connection to the land and to the environment where people grow up in, and I would hate for the land and the environment, due to neglect, cause so much harm to the families that work so hard and with such little resources that live around this entire region.
That's fantastic. Well, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you think is important to share about the lake?
Well, I was just curious, you talked about what you used to do as a kid, but how much have you seen it change over your lifetime, and is that stuff that like you could still do?
You know,
I mean, you can't fish here anymore, really.
yeah, I don't.
I mean, I guess you can, but
You know, I see less people here. Not a lot of fishing as there used to be. Families don't tend to come and have picnics here. You know, there is the smell often. Sometimes on a bad day, you see a lot of dead fish, and parents don't want to expose their kids to that because then they'd have to explain why that's happening. And so, I don't see a lot of those activities. I have seen some projects to develop picnic sites in different areas that for a lot of outsiders come in, the Joshua Tree camper types who would like to stop by and go off the beaten path and see the Salton Sea. And quite honestly, there's a lot of opportunity for that. The yacht club has been funded more so, and there's a lot of community development happening there. And so if you just look by, I draw a lot of spiritual strength and connection with my Creator by looking at His creation. And when I look standing in this desert, and I look across the horizon, and you see the beautiful maroon and purple mountains, and you see the sun reflecting off the Salton Sea, and you see the tranquility of the ducks and of the birds that fly over, and you see the enormous dry desert that surrounds us, then you think that our spirituality, you see that there is replenishment, you see that there is life in wherever that there is a dearth of foliage. In other words, there is still life in some of our darkest moments. There is still life when we are very thirsty to seek new truths or the ultimate truth. And so this Salton Sea resembles that oftentimes for me, knowing that even though we face 120-degree weather, even though there's a lot of desert, dust, etc., that this exists. And we have millions of birds that rely on this sea to stop on their way south. Where are they going? What are their experiences? What's their life story? You have fish that survive in this high salt environment. And so I see a lot of opportunity here. I don't see death and decay. In fact, I see a challenge. I see a public health imminent catastrophe, but I see more opportunity. I see more families coming to enjoy the beach. I see more birds stopping by. I see more fishing for the replenishment of the fish. I see more boating with the North Lake Perimeter Project. I see more geothermal energy. I see more electric cars reducing our pollution, improving our climate change, fueled by the lithium of this Salton Sea, which could save our country enormous amount of progress for our climate change and our overall public health. I see a lot of solution and contribution that this Salton Sea not only has for the surrounding communities, but for our nation, and with the potential lithium for the globe. And so we need to draw attention for that.
It sounds like you're seeing a new way forward. Not quite the Frank Sinatra, old Hollywood days of yachting and glamorous beach. Or do you? Or is it just a different way forward?
No. You can't have a lot of rich Hollywood actors coming here and ignoring the community that live in poverty in the area. That's not acceptable to me. We need to have a bit of projects for everyone, and we can do that. So yes, if there are boating activities, then let's have boating activities that's accessible to everyone to watch. If you want to have air shows over the Salton Sea and have massive people come in to enjoy those, then let's bring the air shows to the Salton Sea. If you want to have in a tribal land development with hotels, restaurants, then so be it. Or create a walkway where people can actually come and walk by the Salton Sea on a leisurely walk with either someone you're courting or someone you've been married with for the next 50 years, which I hope to be one day with my wife and be able to hold her hand and walk by the Salton Sea and tell stories of the days when I was a child coming to have picnic with my families here by the Salton Sea. Or if you want to have the business development with geothermal energy and manufacturing and lithium extraction with transportation into other areas where they actually produce the electrical cars, then let's do it. If you want to have a conservation, wildlife, bird watching location, arboretum, or what do you call for the birds?
Sanctuary, like
Aviary.
aviary. Yeah.
You know,
So not quite a return to the 50s, but a different ideal vision going forward. That's
because we're not in the 50s.
Yeah.
We're, you know, we want extreme sports. We want people to come and spend time with their family. We want to make it accessible, not exclusive. We want the state of California to know that when they come to Palm Springs, once we get this fixed, that a day trip during their week-long stay could be a beautiful Salton Sea in the middle of a desert. And we can show them around, we can give them tours, we can take them on the boat, we can give them a fishing pole and they can go at it. But this is an enormous amount of opportunity. And, you know, I just mentioned the tranquility of listening to the waves and seeing the birds and looking at the sun reflect on the water and the horizon. You can have this to be a faith-based retreat of meditation. You can even have yoga camps in the area where people can come for a week long and really disconnect from the rush of life and reconnect with what's most important for them. And when you think about what's most important, you think your spiritual faith, you think your health, you think your family, and you think the land, the environment, right, where you live. And so let's give that opportunity to people.